I am most grateful for the words of welcome coming from Mr. Rector, Mr. Dean, Dr. Esther Casado, but it is me, I am who ought to be grateful for this invitation. Invitations to Spain are not like any other invitations to lecture. I explained it, tried to explain it quite recently in Oviedo, making a public statement to this effect that a person working in this area of humanities should always remember that modern humanities were born in Spain and not in any other country. The great Spaniard Miguel Cervantes de Saavedra single-handedly created the task, the mission of contemporary humanities by being the first, the founding fathers, the first to tear the curtain, the very thick curtain, which divides most of us, most of the time, from seeing the truth of the world, the curtain which is woven out of prejudices, prejudgments, stereotypes, and other aspects of ideologies which prevent us from understanding what human life is about and what are the real problems of this human life. On my desk is the figure of the hero of the greatest probably ever written novel by Cervantes, Don Quixote, just to remind me that what is the task, what for we are doing, what are we doing. So I am tremendously grateful and at the same time humbled by being here and talking to you, and only tremble that I will meet your expectations and I won't frustrate them. The very beginning of my lecture is risky because I'm starting from a very unfashionable point, from a book written about half a century ago. It is not fashionable to treat seriously books which are written 50 years ago. We treat with awe and respect books written in antiquity and books sold and being known and discussed 1 year or 2 years ago, but nothing in between. I start from this book just to remind you that sociology, which we are all doing, is not a recent invention. It worked its way for many, many years now, and it is worth your while to come again and again to old works of sociology to find out what they have to say. What they have to say is sometimes surprisingly innovative and revealing, enlightening. The book I'm starting from, I am sure you haven't heard about it, but I hope that you will come to the library after the lecture and borrow it if there is a copy there. Is a book written by Michel Crozier. Michel Crozier, French sociologist, who published in 1963 a book called Bureaucratic Phenomenon. Michel Crozier wanted to put to empirical test the ideal type of bureaucracy, and that is something you probably heard of, created by Max Weber. Max Weber represented ideal type of bureaucracy as a factory of rationality, rational behavior, calculation of means against the given ends, selecting the most efficient, the least costly, and the quickest means to achieving the given ends. And he constructed an image of a bureaucratic organization in which people will do nothing else but trying really to meet criteria of rationality. Michel Crozier, much to his astonishment, after investigating three very powerful bureaucratic institutions from different ways of life, political institutions, business institutions, cultural institutions, came to the conclusion that the practice of bureaucratic institution is more reminiscent of the factory of irrationality rather than a factory of rationality. Most of the time, the functionaries of these organizations which he investigated were busy, were worrying, were engaged, were wasting their time on doing things which had nothing to do with selecting rationally means to the ends to which the ostensibly, according to the official version, the bureaucratic organization was to serve. They were engaged in something different altogether. They were engaged in the civil war, ongoing civil war, about gaining more authority in running the affairs of the organizations. They were just fighting each other. They were at each other's throats. They tried to overcome the other side. They were divided into groups fighting with each other and so on. Michel Crozier didn't know at that time what he discovered. He just concluded that it's probably influence of the Frenchness, the element of Frenchness, that is probably French bureaucracy, which differs from the German bureaucracy which Max Weber described. And he suggested that instead of speaking about bureaucratic culture, we should speak about bureaucratic cultures in plural. Okay. Since then, however, many other researchers of bureaucratic organizations in very many countries, including Spain, were made, and the same results were found, that this element of irrationality is tremendously powerful, that the real practice of bureaucratic organization steams clear of the ideal type constructed by Max Weber. So what I'm suggesting to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that Michel Crozier, in this book, Bureaucratic Phenomenon, did what William Blake, the great romantic poet of England, suggested we should all do, namely to try to find, to see the universe in the grain of sand. He just investigated grain of sand, and he found the universe. What was the universe about? He found the secret of all power struggle. Secret of all power struggle. And he actually spelled it out. What does it mean to fight for power? Oversimplifying what he said in this study, just reducing it to one single sentence, I will tell you that this secret consists in deregulating my own action and regulating everybody else's action. In Michel Crozier's own formulation, it was that he who manages uncertainty rules. He who manages uncertainty rules. Indeed, if I am unconstrained, unroutinized in my action, if I can do most surprising things which cannot be predicted in advance, which are not written down in any legal code and so on, then I am element of uncertainty in your situation. If you, however, have your actions routinized, and you have to go on repeating and repeating and repeating the same moves, then you are easily predictable And therefore, I can remove you completely from my calculation. You won't surprise me. I know in advance what your reactions will be. So whoever, I repeat, is close to the sources of uncertainty, whoever manipulates uncertainty has superiority, has authority, has power over the other side. It is most remarkable that Michel Crozier discovered the truth in 1963. 1963 was still the time where we, including myself, including my colleagues, were thinking in terms of what later I came to call the solid phase of modernity, in which could be described, in other words, as a heavy modernity, immobile modernity, modernity which was resistant to being moved places, to change places. That was the time of Henry Ford factory. You know what Henry Ford was about. Henry Ford had huge car-producing plants in Detroit, very heavy plants, which couldn't be easily moved to Bangladesh, which were tied to the place. Huge crowd of workers were employed there. And this Henry Ford set the tone of what later became the stereotype of well-run modern factory, so-called Fordist factory, by performing some quite unbelievable act in his time. Namely, he doubled the wages of his workers. He was interrogated by inquisitive journalists immediately because all other businessmen in America at that time did exactly the opposite. Namely, they tried to reduce the wages, and he doubled. Why did you do it, Mr. Ford? Well, he was a very witty man, so he answered, I did it because I wanted my workers to buy my cars. Of course, it was a joke because how many cars they could buy, it wouldn't do much change in his profits. But on the other hand, doubling wages means increasing, very considerably increasing, the costs of production. So why Ford did it really? He did it really because, ladies and gentlemen, his workers depended on Henry Ford for their living. That's without question. But what is also true is that Henry Ford depended on his wealth, for his wealth on his workers. So he naturally wanted the trained workers, which were already adjusted, forced to work on this conveyor belt, which is a very routine, very nasty job. I don't wish this kind of job on you. But they already were used to it. They already surrendered to this rhythm. He didn't want to lose them to the competitors. And so he wanted to keep them there by doubling their wages. What does it mean? Dependency was at that time mutual, reciprocal. One side depended on the other, and the other depended on the first. They knew, both sides knew, that they will meet each other tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and next week, and next month, and next year, and perhaps even in 10 years. They are both tied to the place. It was before invention of mobile telephones and internet and so on, where you can transfer all your capital by pushing of one button from Detroit to somewhere, Bangladesh, and disappear from view completely. Henry Ford and his contemporaries could not do that very easily. They were as much tied to the place as his workers were. And that's ladies and gentlemen, just try to think about partnerships generally, your own experience of partnership. Well, there are some married couples who consider that even given all the quarrels they have, all the differences between them, all the nasty moments which they experience living together, it is still better to stay together than to go separate ways. So they swear to the partner and to themselves, we are here till death do us part. Now, once that is done, once that decision is taken, then, of course, they have to try to develop some sort of a modus vivendi, a form of cohabitation which is acceptable to both sides. Perhaps it's not perfect, but still, you know, it can be endured. While if the partners come together for a trial, let's move together into one flat, but we will see how it works. So they presume from the very start that their togetherness is a temporary affair, that even the smallest conflict arises to enormous dimension, and the chance of developing modus vivendi is minimal. So that is roughly the framework in which I invite you to place, on the one hand, the Fordist factory, in which both sides are limited, voluntarily limited in their freedom of invention, freedom of surprising. Both sides, therefore, are predictable, and they are on equal level, in a sense, in the process of negotiations around the table. They know that they are able to predict the reactions of the other side. So they are more or less in the same position. Both sides are interested in continuation of their relationship, of their togetherness. Therefore, Henry Ford voluntarily limited his natural desire for more profit. He just limited his profits because he knew that if he pushes this desire too far, then he will lose more than he gains. That was one kind of a situation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a very different kind of world at the moment. The unwritten contract between the two sides, capital and labor, has been one-sidedly, unilaterally broken. One side broke out, the other side was left behind. One side is now flexible, while the other side is still fixed to the place. Previously, both sides were fixed to the place. Now, only one side is, which means that one side acquired the possibility of manipulating uncertainty of the other side. If you don't agree with me, if you don't like me, if you would like better conditions for yourself, okay, goodbye. Just I live with you alone, you stew in your own juice, you know, I am not any longer concerned. The very different situation from the one described by Jürgen Habermas, of whom you know probably a lot, in his famous book, Legitimation Crisis. He said there that it is not true that the so-called capitalist state is an agency of capitalists. It serves the interests of capitalists. The task of the so-called capitalist state is the service not of one side in this relationship between capital and labor, but serving their encounter, their meeting. Capitalism, capitalist system, capitalist economy exists in as far as capital and labor meet regularly with each other, and during that meeting, and that's a very important point, the capitalists are rich enough, are able to pay the full price of labor, while labor is attractive enough, is in good condition, well fed, well educated, well taken care of, to choose to seduce the capital in buying it. Well, hence the state in the period of Soviet modernity walked along this kind of a road. The culmination of this road was the so-called social state. Sometimes it is called welfare state. I prefer to speak about social state because it better emphasizes what was the substance of this kind of arrangement. The social state was there in order to make the constant, perpetual repetition of this successful, effective encounter between capital and labor possible. The social state at that time, until 1970s, was, as Anthony Giddens would say now about the opposite idea, beyond left and right. Anthony Giddens, in his famous book, Beyond Left and Right, The Third Way, suggested that what is beyond left and right today is precisely the dismantling of the social state. But at that time, everybody believed that it is a good investment for all sides, If you want a healthy capitalist economy, you need to have healthy and educated and well-fed working class. You have to have good quality labor. The wealth of the nation as a whole is measured by the number and condition of its producers and its soldiers. Now, the flexible part of this dual relationship is no longer interested in investing in the local power, in the local labor. What for? There's labor everywhere you can go, and there are other lands which are much more hospitable to the capitalist bosses than other countries are. If you have too strong trade unions, for example, defensive organization of labor in Spain, so why not move capital, say, to some country in some dictatorship even in Asia or in Africa, where you can expect docility and obedience and complete absence of the wish to rebel on the part of the local labor. So if you go on strike, if you want to defend your rights here, you can expect the other side or just packing their belongings, and packing their belongings is a very quick affair today. It is just a question of packing your laptop and your mobile telephone and moving elsewhere and leaving people without means of living. If that is the case, then the idea of necessity of the mutually acceptable modus vivendi is no longer on the agenda. What for? It's a very, very nasty process, very difficult, very awkward, lengthy process. And not always it leads to good results. So why to bother yourself with trying to repair mutual relations on the spot if you can do as we all consumers do. If you are dissatisfied with a product, we return it to the shop and demand our money back. Or if it is not accepted by the shop, then at least we throw it away to the dustbin and go to the shops and buy another. So under these conditions, these natural constraints which were imposed upon the human inequality have been removed. Well, the topic of my lecture, as you know from the posters, is precisely the fate of inequality in liquid modern society. And I would like you to put the inequality before and the inequality now in this frame, which I tried to sketch so far. Situation of mutual dependency and situation of one-sided breach of this based on the equity, on equal possibilities, equal chances contract. The results of it. The results of it are most interesting. The very logic of contemporary labor relations, as you probably know, has changed quite considerably. The managers, again, sorry, I will prepare you, I will remind you of an old book. This time I have in mind the James Burnham book about managerial revolution, published immediately before the Second World War in 1939. What James Burnham wrote there was the revolutionary at that time idea that, according to Karl Marx, it is the owners of means of production who rule in the capitalist society, but in fact it was not like that at all, said James Burnham, because the owners hired for money managers to do the dirty job in their factories. They didn't cherish the idea of doing it themselves. They didn't want to be tied to the ground, to have to be present there from early morning till late evening and watch every movement of their workers, and they wanted to be free. They wanted to have pleasure out of their wealth, and therefore have paid the hired managers to do the job. What, however, transpired, said James Burnham, was that who really rules are the people who manage other people's behavior. So the managers slowly, gradually, but unstoppably took the power, the superiority over from the owners. They became the real, genuine lords of the realm. Okay, that is what James Burnham said, and I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you accept what he said, then you should speak now about managerial revolution Mark II. Because the daily supervision of labor is a chore now as it used to be before. And therefore managers, once they acquired power, decided that why should they do the managing job? Let's shift the burden of proof that you are worthy on the employees themselves. The process which is visible all over the place at the moment in contemporary industry, in contemporary organizations in general, is the process of shifting the burden of proof from the managers who are responsible for their subordinates' behavior towards subordinate themselves. Let them prove that they are worthy of continuing employment. The other trend in this big organization is what is called contracting out certain actions, certain areas of action, so that the relationship are now in the process of production are not the relationship between superior and subordinate, but relationship between market partners. It is just the trade relationship of exchange. You give me your services, I will pay you for services delivered, but I don't take responsibility for how you produce them in the first place. So it is a return to some sort of experience economy. That is the new term quite recently coined in science of management, which stands for the intention of managers not to employ their subordinates in a fixed frame, but in fact to open the whole personality of the subordinates to use in their employment in the factory or in the office. That is the tremendous change. If you remember your Max Weber and his ideal type of bureaucracy, it was absolutely the opposite idea which guided it. All private capacities which are not connected to your work inside the bureaucratic office should be left in the cloakroom before you enter the building. They should be separated completely from what are you doing in your office, in your time of work. Your preferences, your loyalties, your networks of friends, your other obligations, other interests are irrelevant to what is being done in the factory, and therefore they should be left outside. Not allowed to interfere with the work of bureaucratic organization. Now it is exactly the other way around. Look, you are all probably armed with mobile telephones, and one of the changes, the great fateful departures which the advent of mobile telephones signaled is that hereby the difference between time of work and time of leisure, between office and home, between being here and being on holiday is effaced. All these boundaries are effaced. The difference does not exist any longer. You carrying with you always to any place where you go, mobile telephone, you are constantly on beck and call. Your whole time, 24 hours a day, is in fact open to use in your office where you work. You can't, like I could when I was your age, I could say, terribly sorry, my boss could phone me, but I could always say, terribly sorry, I was out, I didn't hear the telephone, I couldn't answer. You can't say that because you never go without mobile telephone, even a single step. Going out without a mobile telephone is like going without trousers, so you wouldn't do it really. So we are constantly available. You are constantly available. You have no excuses, no excuses. So that is really a much more convenient for managers situation than the one which was there before. Because it means that you have to repeat again and again the validation of your staying in employment in a particular organization. You are as good as your last success, but your memory of your last success would not last long unless you repeat the same achievement again and again and again. Well, under this situation, ladies and gentlemen, the balance between the two sides which meet in this relation of employment has been suspended. There is no balance any longer. I repeat once again, there are people flexible and there are people fixed. There are people who can easily move elsewhere if situation in particular place grows hot, and other people who are fixed to the place, who don't have freedom of movement, and therefore no access to the sources of uncertainty, and therefore their chances of achieving satisfactory solution are increasingly unequal. And there is no wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that the latest statistics show that after a period when inequality seemed to be shrinking, it is now growing again. And approaching already the 19th century levels and growing unstoppably, and there is no structural arrangement around invisible which seems to be able to stop its growth. Just to give you very basic figures, in the United States of America, for example, the 1% of richest Americans 25 years ago owned 8% of the total American wealth. 1% owned 8%. That was 25 years ago. The latest figures are different. The 1% of richest Americans owns 23% of American wealth, which means that in 25 years you had tripled the distance between the richest and the poorest. Another interesting point, 5% of the richest people in the world own 80%, own the same amount, the same percentage of wealth as the 80% of the poorest people. On the one side, 5%, on the other, 80%. Altogether, ladies and gentlemen, there are 2,800 million people in the world at the moment who have to live on $2 a day or less. Well, this is roughly the scale of the present day inequality. Well, the interesting aspect of this growing inequality has been brought to our knowledge recently by revealing investigations by a man called Glenn Firebow. What Glenn Firebow found out is that until quite recently, we believed that the distance, the inequality between highly developed countries like ours and the only beginning to develop emerging economies, so-called, on the other side, is growing, while the distance between the top and the bottom of social hierarchy in developed countries like Spain or Britain or Germany or whatever is, on the contrary, shrinking. The distance is shrinking. So we have solved the issue, the danger, we have prevented the danger of unstoppably growing inequality thanks to our social arrangements, while on the global scale, there is the problem of inequality which should be attended to. That was until quite recently, until 20 or 30 years ago. But now, Glenn Firebow found a completely different picture, namely the distance between the wealthiest and the poorest countries is shrinking, while the inequality inside the country is growing. So it's exactly the opposite tendency. While the distance on the global scale is shrinking, for the reasons which I just tried to explain to you. The flexibility, the new flexibility of capitals and finances. They can move. They can move to other countries. They can move as they moved 20 years ago to Spain, for example, bringing, screwing up the offers of credit and bringing Spain to some sort of a deep economic crisis in the end. But for the time being, at the beginning, they just jumped up the level of gross national income, gross national product. Now, the same process is repeated all over the world. I listed this history of this affair. In 1994, there was the famous Mexico tequila crisis. In 1997, there was collapse of currencies of Southeast Asia. In 1998, there was the Russian ruble catastrophe. In 1999, there was the Brazilian debacle. In 2002, there was a collapse of economy in Argentina. Now it is being repeated in various other places on the outskirts of the highly developed world, like Greece or Ireland and Iceland. And I don't want to be a panic monger, but it may come also to Iberian Peninsula. So the pattern is repeated over and over again. But the statistical outcome of it, that the differences between the highly developed, old developed countries and the newly developing is shrinking. For the same reasons of the split between the flexible and the fixed, you have also the other tendency, namely the tendency that the inequalities inside the developed countries, inequalities which were believed to be already overcome, they are returning with vengeance. And the distance between the richest and the poorest is expanding in our part of the world, which were the pioneers of actually stemming this process. That's the present situation. Two tendencies in full force. And both tendencies being a logical result of the passage from, differently organized, the solid phase of modernity to the present day deregulated, the liquid phase of modernity. We are only now coming to appreciate fully the Michel Crozier discovery. And that's why I advise you to go to the library and read the book. He was, in a sense, unknowingly, without realizing that, acted as a sort of a prophet. He predicted what's going to happen, namely that struggle for power and privileges and advantages will boil down to attempt to untie one's own hands and tie other people's hands and feet. And that is how it works. I would like to finish these considerations with quotations from the great Portuguese writer for change, José Saramago. I hope you know his books. He's a great writer. My most recent discovery, I fell in love, and I read everything he published so far. Unfortunately, I learned that he won't be publishing any longer, so I felt very, very sad for that reason. In his diaries, that was the last publication, he conducted a diary in last 2 years of his life, 2008 and 2009. I advise you to read the diaries. They are last will and testament of this great humanist and great writer. What José Saramago said there, I quote, "Who has calculated how much misery, fear, hopelessness, helplessness, degradation, humiliation, indignity of how many poor, outcasts, excluded people is needed to make one person rich?" He asked, who has calculated that? I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it is high time to start calculating.